Hello there! In this video we're going to look at what would have happened if Palpatine had found Anakin before the Jedi had. What would have happened if Palpatine had trained Anakin in secret and the Jedi didn't even know that Anakin existed. Now this video is a suggestion from one of you guys. Bam! There's the suggestion on the screen, there you go. So remember to suggest any videos that you'd like to see in the comments and hopefully I can make them all. But without further ado, let's go on with the video. Our story starts before the Phantom Menace. Or at least before when the Phantom Menace would happen if it was the same timeline, but it's not going to be the same timeline because this is a what if video, so that's kind of the point. But anyway, Palpatine would want to meet up with the Trade Federation, and specifically Newt Gunray, so they could organise their plans. He'd want to meet up in person because there'd been security issues within the HoloNet, and so he didn't trust the HoloNet to not be hacked, and then people might work out that he was a Sith Lord, which wouldn't be exactly great for his plans. Palpatine would want to meet up with Newt on a backwater planet, a planet that no one would ever realise that there was a senator and a viceroy of the Trade Federation on. And so what planet would that be? Tatooine, of course. The two of them would arrive on Tatooine, and coincidentally there would be a pod racing event happening. This would be about 6 months before the Phantom Menace, or when the Phantom Menace would have happened if it was going to happen. Initially, they wouldn't have any interest in attending the pod race. However, Palpatine would then hear of talk of a human boy who was competing in this pod race. People were saying it wasn't possible, humans didn't have fast enough reactions, and Palpatine knew this to be true because, although he didn't like pod racing, he was familiar with what it was and how difficult it was, and so the only way that this boy was going to be able to pod race was if he was very, very force sensitive. Palpatine, or Darth Sidious as Newt knew him, would propose that they could go to the event because it might be fun, and after all Newt wouldn't disagree with him because he was a Sith, and you don't argue with Sith. So they would go to the race and they would see Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine would realise that he was right, this boy was extremely strong with the Force. He was untrained but strong, and this boy would make a much better apprentice than Darth Maul. After the race, Palpatine would say to Newt that he needed to go and do something private, and that he would meet up with Newt a bit later on. Palpatine would go and try and find the boy, Anakin Skywalker. He hadn't completed the race, but he had survived when he'd crashed, which was a good thing, and he'd done quite a lot of the race before crashing. And so Palpatine could see the potential in this boy. Palpatine would be fully aware of the fact that if he did take this boy as an apprentice, he would have to change his plans, he would have to alter them, all of them almost, because his plans revolved around having an apprentice who was already trained in the dark side, and if he took this boy as an apprentice, he couldn't have Darth Maul as well, and so Darth Maul would have to be disposed of, and then he'd be back to square one with his apprentice. But when Palpatine finally did find Anakin, he would know it would be worth it to train this boy. This boy was something special. He was far more powerful than Darth Maul could ever be. Unlike the Jedi, Palpatine wasn't really bothered how he got Anakin off-world. He wasn't bothered about offending anyone or someone being worried that they'd lost their slave. Palpatine would just take Anakin, because after all, who's going to argue with a Sith Lord? He would make sure he knew where Anakin was from and the people who might ask about Anakin, because if he had to tie up some loose ends, he'd have to know who to go to in order to tie up those loose ends. Palpatine would return to his shuttle with Anakin. Anakin would probably be asleep. Palpatine had probably put him to sleep using the same trick that Kylo does in Episode 7, although Episode 7 probably won't happen in the same way because this is a what-if video, but you know what I mean. And on the journey, Palpatine would need to work out how he was going to alter his plans, how everything could fit together to work around this boy. Palpatine's first problem was that he had to get rid of Maul somehow. He couldn't have two apprentices, and so Maul had to go. Another problem was that Plagueis was still alive, and Palpatine didn't really want Plagueis to be alive. Plagueis was already suspicious of Maul, and so if Palpatine got rid of Maul and replaced him with an obviously far stronger Force user, Plagueis would be even more suspicious. Palpatine had told Plagueis that Maul was only a Sith assassin, but this boy would never pass off as a Sith assassin, and so how would he get rid of Plagueis and Maul? Palpatine would come up with a plan to get rid of Maul and Plagueis at the same time. He would say to Maul that they were going to kill Plagueis, that finally Maul could officially become a Sith apprentice, because Palpatine was now the Sith Master. But when they entered Plagueis' chamber, Palpatine would stand back and let Maul fight Plagueis on his own. In fact, Palpatine would join Plagueis and aid him in defeating Darth Maul. Maul wouldn't stand a chance, he would be defeated very easily, and after the fight, Plagueis would trust Palpatine far more than he did before. He'd just been aided in a fight after all, against an attempt on his life. But what Plagueis wouldn't realise is that when he turned his back, when he let his guard down, Palpatine would then kill Plagueis. Palpatine would then then be without an apprentice and without a master. So now Palpatine could proceed unhindered by Plagueis or Maul with his plans, but he still had one issue that he had to resolve, regarding the fact that he no longer wanted the Sith to be discovered. He needed to keep them a secret. In The Phantom Menace as we know it, he's quite happy for Maul to be discovered by the Jedi, but now his apprentice was a boy. His apprentice needed training before the Sith could reveal themselves. They weren't strong enough to take on the galaxy yet. So if the attack on Naboo went wrong for some reason and Nute Gunray was captured, there wouldn't be a Sith to bail him out. Palpatine would be in the Senate trying to appeal his case to gain more power in the Senate. And Maul is now dead, so Maul wouldn't be able to go and help Nute Gunray. And so the attack on Naboo couldn't happen. Palpatine couldn't have the Sith being revealed. They weren't strong enough now. They could be far stronger than they ever would have been with Maul as the apprentice, but they weren't yet strong enough to reveal themselves to the galaxy. So Palpatine would call off the blockade of Naboo. Unfortunately, Nute Gunray wouldn't really be very happy about this, and Palpatine would know that. And so Palpatine would organise for Nute Gunray to be in an accident. And so Nute Gunray would be killed in some sort of ship crash outside Coruscant, because Palpatine really wouldn't want him telling the Senate about Palpatine's true identity. But the problem is now, if Palpatine isn't going to blockade Naboo, how does he intend to become Supreme Chancellor? Well, for that, he would organise a meeting with Chancellor Valorum and kill Chancellor Valorum with lightsabers, making sure that it was only lightsabers and that obviously security cameras were turned off. Then he would say that the two of them were attacked by a Jedi-like figure. After all, it was lightsaber wounds that people would see, and the only beings in the galaxy known to use lightsabers were Jedi. This would do two things for Palpatine. First of all, it would worsen the Jedi public relations, because although Palpatine hadn't said it was the Jedi outright, the galaxy wouldn't know who else it could be. It must be someone affiliated with the Jedi because they had a lightsaber. The other benefit for Palpatine was that he could use this event to gain sympathy in the Senate. So when the Senate came to elect their new Supreme Chancellor, he would have a sympathy vote, and he would use this sympathy vote to become Supreme Chancellor. Palpatine would want to train Anakin in the dark side, but this would be easier said than done, because Anakin was a kind-hearted boy. Palpatine would therefore kill Shmi and frame the Jedi for the murder. This would do two things. It would push Anakin to the dark side. He would embrace his anger, but he would also always see the Jedi as his enemy. He would always see the Jedi as the people who had killed his mother, the only person he ever cared about. So how would Palpatine actually increase the power that the Supreme Chancellor had? In the prequels, we see that he uses the Clone Wars as an excuse to give himself emergency powers, which he then doesn't relinquish. Whereas now, he wouldn't want to cause a conflict like the Clone Wars for two reasons. The first one was that his apprentice wasn't yet ready to fight in a war. In fact, his apprentice was still being trained. The other problem was that he didn't have Count Dooku or Nute Gunray to be his puppets on the other side, the Separatist side. So he would have to come up with an alternative solution to give himself more power in the Senate. The way he would do this is by causing smaller uprisings, far smaller than the Clone Wars, in individual star systems. He would manipulate the local governments and cause unrest in society. The clone army, which would still exist, would therefore be used to suppress these uprisings. But unlike the Clone Wars, the Jedi wouldn't get involved, and that's for two reasons. The first reason is simply that the battles were smaller. They didn't require the Jedi, or at least the Jedi didn't think that they required the Jedi. The other reason was that Qui-Gon was still alive. He hadn't gone to Naboo, and so wasn't killed on Naboo by Maul. And also, Maul was dead at this point. So all in all, Qui-Gon was very much alive. And we know that Qui-Gon wasn't bothered about politics. He wanted to stick to Jedi ideals, and the Jedi ideals were that they were keepers of the peace. They were not soldiers or warriors. And so at this point, Qui-Gon would have reached the rank of master, and his influence on the council would make sure that the Jedi stayed out of these conflicts. Palpatine would use this to mar the image of the Jedi. He would paint them as traitors. He wouldn't outright say that they were traitors. He wasn't ready to do that yet. But he would say that maybe they should get involved. He would suggest that he could use help on the front lines, and that the Jedi should really be the ones leading the battles. But Qui-Gon and the Jedi would stick to their ideals and wouldn't get involved. And so public relations between the Jedi and the public would worsen over time. So Palpatine's process for gaining more power would go something like this. First, he would manipulate a local government as Darth Sidious. That would cause unrest in the population. Maybe he would use terrorist attacks to further drive home the fact that Coruscant was at risk, and so was the rest of the galaxy. He would send in the clones to suppress the uprising, and maybe the Jedi would go and try and help with a diplomatic solution, but that probably wouldn't work particularly well because the Sith were involved in making sure a conflict did arise, and if the Jedi who was sent to find a diplomatic solution to the unrest became a little bit suspicious of the cause of the conflict or the unrest, well, that would be the point that Darth Vader was sent in to make that Jedi disappear. Palpatine would then be able to calm the conflict down. After all, he was the one that was instigating it. It would appear that he'd managed to quell another uprising, and therefore he would have more grounds to say that he was the right person to be leading the Galactic Republic, and if only he had a little bit more power, he would have been able to stop it earlier, with less bloodshed. And so he would repeat this process, continually gaining more and more power for himself. And this would go on for quite a few years. The image of the Jedi would become more and more negative, and only a select few people in the galaxy, like senators such as Bail Organa or Padme Amidala, would actually still respect the Jedi for sticking with their ideals. Unfortunately for Palpatine though, Vader would become tired of this slow, manipulative strategy. He wanted to destroy the Jedi, but Palpatine would tell him that it wasn't time, and so Vader would start to form his own plan. Vader's plan would go something like this. Next time there was an uprising on a planet caused by Palpatine, Vader would claim that he was going along to aid the clones, to aid in suppressing the uprising. But instead, he would aid the uprising itself. Therefore, the uprising would grow. It would grow to a point where Palpatine couldn't easily suppress it just through manipulation. Vader would do this in hopes of drawing the Jedi to the conflict. After all, we now have a conflict that Palpatine isn't able to control, so maybe, finally, the Jedi would get involved. Now, Palpatine wouldn't want the Jedi to get involved, because whereas Vader wanted to destroy the Jedi, and he didn't care how he did it or what their image was when he destroyed them, Palpatine would want to mar their image so badly that when he did destroy them, the galaxy didn't really care. In fact, it might even be happy about it. He could just declare them traitors, march the clones into the temple, and wipe them out, and no one would care. Fortunately for Palpatine, the Jedi still wouldn't get involved. They would stick to their ideals. They'd already declared that they weren't going to get involved in small uprisings, and this was still just a small uprising. It was bigger than Palpatine wanted it to be, but it was still small. It was localized to a single star system. Palpatine would contact Vader in hopes of working out what had gone wrong in his plan. He would find that Vader was actually the thing that had gone wrong in his plan. Vader would criticize Palpatine. He would say that he'd gone about it all wrong. He was allowing the Jedi to thrive on Coruscant. The discussion would end, maybe discussion isn't the right word, but we'll stick with it. The discussion would end with Palpatine announcing that Vader was no longer his apprentice. He would say that Vader had potentially jeopardized 1,000 years of Sith working behind the scenes to gain more and more power in the background, and Vader may have ruined that. Vader would decide that he would now completely join the uprising. Previously, he'd only join them for as long as it would take to draw out the Jedi, but now he was on their side. Now he wasn't just trying to draw out the Jedi, now he would try and amass enough power to overthrow Palpatine. He would cut off communication from the larger galaxy, so no one would really know what was happening, except this uprising wasn't being stopped. In fact, it was growing. It was expanding beyond just one star system, and soon the galaxy would be in two parts. The Galactic Republic, and what would become known as silent space for the rest of the galaxy, which is the systems that Vader is in charge of because they've cut off communication. Now in this silent space, Vader would amass his Sith army. The Jedi still wouldn't be involved in the conflict. They would aid refugees and people fleeing from silent space, but they wouldn't join the conflict in any official military capacity. Because of this, the public view of the Jedi would become so bad, riots would start to happen outside of the Jedi Temple. I assume that part of the taxes of the people of the Galactic Republic goes towards the Jedi, because the Jedi don't seem to make any money any other way, and yet they live quite well. And so these riots would be a result of the population basically thinking that the Jedi were taking their money and not protecting them like they said they were supposed to. The galaxy would remain in this state until Vader would decide that enough was enough. He would launch an attack directly on Coruscant with all of his Sith troopers, as he would call them. For the sake of this video, they'll be played by Sith troopers from episode 9. Yep, there you go, on the screen, hopefully. There they are. Lovely. And obviously the clone troopers are clone troopers and they're Galactic Republic soldiers. This attack would be primarily focused on the Senate building, and so the civilians in the surrounding area would be forced to evacuate. Vader would manage to confront Palpatine on his own in the Senate building. They would fight. An epic fight between two Sith, the two most powerful dark side users ever in the galaxy. Vader would become more and more angry with Palpatine as the fight progressed. He would accuse Palpatine of letting his enemies live like royalty under his nose. He would say he should have taken action against the Jedi years ago. Palpatine would just laugh and say that Vader was so short-sighted, he didn't understand. He didn't think like a Sith, he just thought like an anarchist. The two of them would end up outside of the Senate building in their fight. Now, fortunately for Palpatine, civilians and senators had long disappeared from the area because they'd evacuated. The only beings in the area who were still there were the Jedi and the Sith. The Jedi had been helping people evacuate. They'd just about finished their job, and Yoda would actually be outside the Senate building when the two of them ended up fighting there. So Yoda would join the fight. Now we would have the most epic lightsaber and Force fight we have ever seen in Star Wars, between probably the three most powerful Force users ever: Yoda, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine. Or Chancellor Palpatine, he's Chancellor at this point. Yoda, Vader, and Chancellor Palpatine. The fight would basically be a free-for-all. No one would take anyone else's side because obviously the Sith don't like the Jedi, but both of the Sith don't like each other. The fight would end in a stalemate, and the clones would have managed to gain an upper hand on the Sith troopers. Vader would be forced to order a retreat from Coruscant. But now Palpatine would have to act quickly. His identity had been exposed, but only to the Jedi. Yoda would manage to return to the temple, but Palpatine would call an emergency meeting of the Senate. He would form a new empire, as he would say that it was the only way to prevent a further attack like the one that had just happened. He would also claim that he had reason to believe that the Jedi had been accomplices in planning the attack, therefore removing any credibility they would have in claiming that he was a Sith. Most of the public didn't like the Jedi anyway, and so they would all believe this very happily. Palpatine would announce that the Jedi were enemies of the Galactic Republic, and he would also say that it was time that they were eradicated from the galaxy. The Jedi would be forced to flee. They wouldn't fight the galaxy, they wouldn't fight innocent civilians who had just been misled by Palpatine. So aided by the few people who still thought that they were good, like Padme or Bail or Mon Mothma, they would escape, and they would escape to Ilum. From there, the Jedi would venture into the unknown regions, and Ilum would be like a lookout on the rest of the galaxy to monitor, to make sure that they hadn't been followed into the unknown regions by Palpatine or Vader. The Jedi would continue the order in the unknown regions. They might occasionally try and help out in secret the rest of the galaxy, but they wouldn't have much success. And the history of the Jedi, the name Jedi, would disappear from the galaxy altogether. Many people would believe that they had never existed at all 20 years later, and even the people who remembered them wouldn't speak of them. So how would the galaxy look now? The part of the galaxy that the Jedi weren't in, so the known galaxy. Well, it would be split in two. There would be the Empire, which was ruled by Palpatine, a secret Sith. And there was Silent Space, which were the planets that were ruled by Vader and knew that Vader was a Sith. However, the people in the Empire would think that Vader was actually a Jedi, because after all, Palpatine could use this to basically make people remain hating the Jedi, because as long as Vader existed, there would be a war between Silent Space and the Empire. And this is how the galaxy would remain, at least for the time being, and that's where I'm going to leave the video for now. If you guys want to hear how I think the story would continue, remember to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, comment down below how you want the story to continue. I do look at the comments. In fact, as I've said, this video was from one of you guys, so remember to comment down below what your opinions are on this video, on what you think would happen next, whether you want to see what would happen next, or anything else you want to tell me. Check out any of the other videos I've made, great one in the top left and the bottom left. Thanks for watching, bye!